and go home in peace.
Hello everyone, welcome here to this session on finance and investments. I'm happy to welcome on the stage Professor Massimo Amato from Bocconi University and Sara Lovisolo, Head of Group ESG at Euronext. Thank you for being here. In this session, we'll focus on the role of the private and the public sector in our ongoing green transition. And we will try to understand what are the possibilities, what are the opportunities of intervention, both by the private and public actors. And I will start by asking to Sara Lovisolo, what are the opportunities and limits of the new taxonomies that are being created for the private sector, such as ESG? And how can we avoid greenwashing and promote a transition towards sustainable investments with these new taxonomies and with these new efforts from the private sector?
Thank you for the invitation to join you this year discussion on the new globalization. The message I would like to give you upfront is that we need to limit the expectations around finance. So sometimes you are given the impression that finance can save the world, and from inside finance, we all very often have the impression that these are outmoded expectations that should be somehow managed. Finance can do something for sustainability. So I think what we are trying to develop inside finance, the tools that are put forward as a solution, such as the taxonomy, is what can be done from our perspective. But for sure, it's no substitute for a change in the real economy, for change driven by policymakers. So what finance tries to achieve is to drive capital towards the existing assets, the assets that are on the market, that contribute the most to the transition. But finance cannot invent new companies, cannot invent new technologies. This is it's outside our reach. So the tools that you've mentioned, the taxonomy, that is a classification of activities that contribute to green the economy, can only select companies, projects, initiatives that are already there. And this is a big limit, because you cannot, create entrepreneurs. You cannot invent new technology, or you cannot push research and development that is not already there. So sometimes greenwashing is raised as an allegation because clearly what's already existing on the market is not enough. It's never enough. But what we can do, the only thing we can do, is to say, among the projects that you see on the markets, among the projects that are funded, this limited selection can contribute, and consider that the projects aligned with the taxonomy, from the one from the European Union, represent something like 6% of what is listed on global markets. And even that 6% might not look very good to you if you take a close look. But unfortunately, we cannot do any better than that. So this is where we bring in science to make sure that at least that 6% can make a significant contribution. And what about the remaining 94%? There are many things that are needed, but not necessarily contributing to the transition.
Thank you very much for the interesting description of the current situation, and I already have some further questions, but we can develop them better in the following debate. We have some time, and we can. I think that interesting things will emerge. And now I will proceed to ask to Professor Amato something about the public sector. The public sector will play a key role in organizing the green transition, both with laws and with money. But at the European level, which original and innovative solutions can we use to enable a higher public spending towards a green transition?
Thank you, Alessandro, for your question. Yes, I think that we are in a good situation for discussing that, because we are in the process of the rewriting of the European rules, which should, I think, take into account the issues you mentioned. That is the role of public expenditure, fiscal policies in order to promote growth, with a view to stability, because we need both, and we missed both in a sense in the past crisis. So what I could do for you is to share with you a project on which I'm working since 2020, which is the project of a European debt agency, which could manage in a collaborative way the go-to-market of national debts, and also should be able to manage and organize the rollover of the Commission's debt, which is generated by the NGO, etc. So okay, we have already what we need. This is the title, Eurozone Public Debt, a Collaborative Strategy, because since now the incompleteness of the monetary union had to be seen mostly on by the fact that national debts were running in competition on financial markets. This was a problem. So, what kind of union do you think to achieve by grounding it on competition and not on collaboration? So, the strategic political issue is precisely how to invent a collaborative strategy. So, we are in the process of rewriting the rules, and the question is, can we go back to the old normal? And I think that the good answer, the hopefully good answer that hopefully will be given is no. In any case, Olivier Blanchard says no, because this is a quote from a recent policy brief with Leandro Zettelmeier, which says the European Union's fiscal rules have been suspended. When they are reinstated, they will need to be modified, if only because of the high levels of debt. We have to manage higher levels of debt, and we cannot afford to come back to the previous situation. But also the politics says no. Commissioner Gentiloni said for 2022, but hopefully also for the 23, I hope. For 22, it is clear that fiscal support will still be necessary. Better to err towards doing too much rather than too little. In any case, the main obstacle to fiscal expansion, which is needed, is financing. Here, Blanchard can help us with his recent articles on debt sustainability, because this is the problem. What is crucial with public debt sustainability is the difference between the rate of growth that fiscal expansion can produce and the cost of debt servicing, so G and R. And when the growth that the fiscal expansion produces is higher than the cost of his financing, a fiscal expansion can be carried out without a debt explosion. With another implication, when public debt is made sustainable, markets are keen to perceive government bonds as safe assets. That is to say, assets that stabilize the portfolios of asset manager. Does Europe already dispose of an adequate amount of safe assets? Certainly not. Should Europe need safe assets? Certainly yes. So how to go in this direction? The debate of the Eurobond started with the sovereign debt crisis in 2010 and 2012 in particular. But it was stopped by a lack of a perception of about its feasibility, because the idea was that if you want an Eurobond, you have to accept fiscal collaboration, fiscal union, so a step towards federalism. But my thesis is that a safe Eurobond implies certainly collaboration, but not necessarily federalism. So if we had a federal treasury able to issue bonds guaranteed by a federal bank, we will probably be better off. But this is not in the immediate horizon of politics. So in the meantime, the only way forward is to organize a structural collaborative strategy for Eurozone member states' access to financial markets. And we cannot ask the ECB to do all the work, because the work of ECB is an emergency work, already with PSPP, but even more with the emergency purchase programs, which have to be finished when the emergency is over. So what we can do? The reference is to an article that I published in this year, Europe, Public Debt and Safe Assets, the scope for a European debt agency. So in a new institution which puts in place a collaborative strategy, but not a mutualizing solution. So we can collaborate without mutualizing, okay? A systematic collaborative strategy on Eurozone public debt management must for now exclude any form of mutualization, because the political resistances are too strong. And in a sense, they are right to be strong, because you cannot build a federal state out of an emergency. It is a longer period, a longer run project. So, in the meantime, we can think to an European debt agency that issues a true European safe asset without involving mutualization, with a common management of member states' public debt, as if we already had a European treasury, to which the European debt agency could pave the way. How it works? The details are not are in the article, so I will concentrate on the main aspects. If you have a debt agency, this agency can finance itself on the markets, issuing bonds with finite maturity. So 1-year bonds or indexed longer term of bonds. Raises its money and makes perpetual loans to member states. What is the advantage of a perpetual loans? When you have a perpetual loan, you don't have to go to the market for refinancing. So you avoid refinancing risk, rollover risk, and you filter, in a sense, this risk. Since the refinancing risk is filtered, the cost of the loan is based only on the fundamental risk of each individual member state. That is, in a sense, is credit risk, is the possibility of its default in relation to the rules that are in place. So, which counts for each state is its specific creditworthiness. So you have the possibility to distinguish between different installments because you have the possibility to distinguish between different levels of credit, different levels of rating, if you want. What is the role in this case for the ECB? The ECB ceases to continue with the quantitative easing, but it can remunerate the reserves of the EDA. It can buy its bond so as to mitigate their volatility, because in this sense she would act more in line with this mandate. She wouldn't finance in a discretionary way this state or that state, but the whole Eurozone. This is the advantage. So this is the strongest point. The European Debt Agency avoid mutualization and the moral hazard that could result from it. Because it's clear, this is the very objection to mutualization. If German taxpayers are called upon to pay for the decision of the Italian government, there is a political problem, a real political problem. But if every state pays his bill with his tax receipts, then we don't have mutualization, we don't have moral hazard. If you do a bad fiscal policy, you pay more, okay? But what states are prevented from is the vagaries of the market sentiment. In 2012, Italy was prey of a market sentiment that betted on against Italy for its default, and these expectations were self-fulfilling. Okay. Third aspect, there is with the European agency we would have a European safe asset that markets desperately need. Okay. And we would have a new synergy with the ECB. And that will unburden the ECB from the procrastination, the indefinite procrastination of its emergency policies. In the article, we made a counterfactual exercise. We put the question, what if a European debt agency would have put in place in 2002? So with the birth of euro. This is the graph. Solid line, the installments they should have been paid, would have been paid by Italy in blue and Germany in yellow, if the European debt agency were in place. So you see that since 2002, Germany would have paid less than Italy, okay? But the dotted line, in particular between 2012 and 2015, so before the quantitative easing, show what markets did. Markets did overshoot the Italian debt and undershoot the German debt. So the advantages are absolutely clear. We wouldn't have had the sovereign debt crisis, simply. So I come to an end. When we speak about fiscal rules, we speak about the trade-off between expansion, growth, and stability. It is the name of the pact, Growth and Stability Pact. And this is what is clear, that we cannot accept that growth should be made at the expense of stability, but also that stability should be obtained at the expense of growth. So, by optimizing the cost of financing for all member states, the European Debt Agency helps to keep the rate of growth greater than the interest rate. And in this way, it allows to more expansive and sustainable fiscal rules. And this is what Europe needs very much now. And in a sense, rules are for the politicians, but the technocrats can do something in this direction, provide a tool that make it possible to have the best of two worlds, that is growth, expansionary policies, and a rational and low financing of the fiscal expansions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Amato mentioned the role of public debt as a safe asset for the private markets. And I would ask to Sara Lovisolo, what is currently, both from, before you talked about the situation with ESG and so on, but what is the situation now with this changing private finance at the European level? What are the main novelties of the transformations, and how could the presence of a safe asset transform and make stronger the European financial ecosystem?
So there is an important role that public finance can play, and it's about de-risking. And so this is how you can use safe assets, especially as a guarantee. So, and they can be used to multiply the power of public finance. So a very important tool that the European Union is using consists in providing guarantees for projects and ensuring the so-called crowding in of private finance. So private, especially when you consider new technologies that can be risky. So funding technologies that are developed for the decarbonization of our economy can be risky. There is research and development sometimes. You don't have, you are called to finance initiatives that are just proof of concept. So there's an element, a significant risk in these new technologies. What the public sector can do is to play the role of the taker of first loss. So in the case there is, something that doesn't go well with this new initiative enterprise, the state can take the first loss. So we have seen examples of this type of funds being set up by states funds set up by the European Union that can ensure the risking of green initiatives, and in this way these projects become more appealing for private finance, also for institutional investors such as pension funds that are really risk averse. So those funds that use the savings of private investors to take care of their lifelong pensions have to be very, very careful, and they should never invest in assets that are risky. So the fact that you have this type of guarantees can really be helpful. So it's another way, not just the Next Generation EU is aimed at funding the full cost of national investments, but there is a smarter way that makes money go faster and further, that is using public money for as a guarantee, and there are examples of that. And the EU is also applying some criteria from the taxonomy, for example, the do no significant harm principle, to avoid that this money, the guarantee, is invested in projects that lock in technologies that are not compatible with the Green Deal. So for example, the European Investment Bank is no longer investing in funding high carbon technologies, in coal and in other projects like that, because finance can be very helpful, but can also make sure that investment in the wrong assets, in the wrong project, are here to stay, because you cannot divest before you have had the full return from your investment. So I think we are starting to embed some sustainability considerations into this mechanism of public funding.
We talked about governments, we talked about private finance. We didn't really talk about another important actor, the central bank. And what can, this question is for both of you, and what can the central bank do with respect both to the private finance and to the public sector? So maybe Professor Amato can delve a little more into what he said before, and but I will start from Ms. Lovisolo, and what can the central bank do with respect to private finance in this green transformation? For example, accepting some bonds as collateral or refusing others. Is there scope for doing this?
So we should take to, when we start talking about central banks, we take in another element, that is the management of ESG risks from that is the risk in the financial sector from another perspective, that is from the consideration of especially climate-related risks. The use of quantitative easing that targets specifically green bonds, green assets, could be meaningful if there were lots of green assets. There are, as I said, very limited availability of the green assets, so this could perhaps lead to an overpricing of the assets. So I'm not so much interested in that part. I'm more interested in the ability of the central banks, also the European Banking Authority, to make banks aware that they could reduce their exposures to risky assets, high carbon assets, and increase their exposures to green assets, because these protects them from climate-related risks, so-called transitional risks, over the long term. And what is happening in Europe is that banks are now invited to do climate-related stress tests against a number of scenarios that currently the bank can develop by themselves. But the important thing is that we they can rely on EU-wide scenarios about what happens if we go beyond 1.5 degree, what happens if we stay within 1.5, what happens if we reach 3.7 degrees of global warming, and reverse engineer. So this is the idea. You look what happens. What happens in 2050? You are a bank that just is exposed to agriculture. What happens to the agricultural sector in 2050 if there are there's no water anymore? So are you sure you're safe as a bank just being exposed to that sector? Should you start thinking about funding, projects that try to make agriculture more sustainable and agriculture that can adapt to the new high temperature scenario? Or these are the type of questions that central banks can encourage banks to start asking themselves, because by making these questions, you start collecting the data. Very often banks don't know exactly to which economic sectors they are exposed to. Also, think of the built environment. Banks don't know of the mortgages, whether they are for energy efficiency homes, buildings, or for buildings that are very poor energy efficiency certificates. Banks don't know exactly their exposures through their mortgage portfolio. And starting to ask these questions can help, and the taxonomy regulation helps asking these questions. The banks will be asked to report on the green asset ratio, but this is not the full risk exposure. So I think that just looking at the green asset ratio is not enough, and there's a big role that central banks can play in providing
broader
guidance.
Concerns also.
Yeah.
I would ask just a last impression from Professor Amato, maybe more on the fiscal policy side and the policy mix between central banks and governments.
Yes. Does it work? È morto. No, adesso funziona. We are more safe. I would take on one of the remarks of Sara when she spoke about the time horizon of banks. What can we say about what the state of the world would be in 20 years? And here we came to what Keynes called uncertainty, radical uncertainty. We simply do not know. So financial markets and financial operators are confronted with the fact that their longer-term expectations are made on a really precarious basis, because future is not known, is difficult to know. So in order to defeat the dark forces of the future, as Keynes says, we need some safe anchor in order to expose. If we can, let's say, have a risky interest rate, which is lower, if we have a safe interest rate, which is controlled by a central bank. And the safe rate is the rate on the public debt. So central banks have the task of managing the longer-term expectation about national debts and public debts. Because if you want, historically, the financial sector is a play with three players. We have markets, we have states, and we have central banks. And the role of central banks is to mediate between the markets and the states in order to give to the markets a fixed point on the basis of which they can do their best calculations. Markets, when are liquid and deep, are best computers of the future, but they need an anchor which they don't they cannot manage to elaborate themselves. They need some external anchor, and this is the role of a central bank. And this role should be is best done, best played when the central banks are capable to offer to the markets a safe asset.
I think we had a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. And we deconstructed the false dichotomy between private and public finance, between the state and the market. And I think this is a very precious discussion because we really saw that state and market, public and private finance are complementary, not opposites. And thank you very much, Sara Lovisolo and Massimo Amato. And I tell to the people at home that they can reconnect for the opening session at 6 p.m. And thanks to the audience for the attention. Thank you.